Hi everyone, welcome to the Humans of Forensics podcast. Today we have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Woodall, a forensic toxicologist that also happens to be a professor here at UTM. My name is Cassie and I'm the social media public relations officer for the IVNVI. I'm in my third year in the forensic biology specialist along with a philosophy of science minor. And with me is my fellow Forensic Society executive, Noah.
Thank you for that, Cassie. Hi, everyone. My name is Noah. I'm in my second year, majoring in psychology and minoring forensic science and biology. I am the treasurer for Forensic Society. So, Dr. Woodall.
Hi, thanks for having me on your podcast today. So I'm Karen Woodall. I'm a forensic toxicologist and I'm also a professor in the forensic science department at the University of Toronto.
So since many people may be unaware, would you be able to briefly explain what forensic toxicology is?
Yes, a simple definition is that it's the study of adverse effects of drugs, alcohol, and poisons in a medico-legal context.
Thank you for clarifying. So before we get into the question and answer portion, let's discuss a case in the media today that's relevant to forensic toxicology.
The case of Brady Robertson has hit the news very recently, and it involved a car accident that led to the death of a woman and 3 young daughters. A Brampton judge ruled that he did not have he did have drugs in the system when the car crash hit hers, but it's very unclear if the crash was due to impairment.
The toxicology evidence in this case established that Mr. Robinson had THC and fluvomazolam in his blood, but it was an unknown quantity and therefore could not be argued that the drugs were necessarily impairing his ability to drive at that instant. He also pleaded guilty to 4 counts of dangerous driving causing death in a collision that took place on June 18th, 2020. Dr. Woodall, can you briefly explain what the sedative is for and for people who are unaware?
Yes, the drug fluvomazolam, I can't even say it myself. It's what we call a novel psychoactive substance, and it's an illicit drug. So it's very similar to prescription medications that are called benzodiazepines. So it's a type of benzodiazepine, and usually those drugs are prescribed for the treatment of anxiety. They can help sleep disorders, they can help seizure disorders, but they can also be used as drugs of abuse. And this new substance that was detected in this case, it's something that's not legally available. It's never been approved for use in humans. So in the last few years, it suddenly started to appear on the illicit drug scene. And so it's starting to cause issues in criminal cases like this one, because it is a sedative drug and it can cause impairment.
So often impaired driving is used to refer to simply to drinking and driving, but more recently it extended to more substances. How can driving be impaired by something like THC or a sedative like you just mentioned?
Yes, so drugs and driving is becoming kind of more common, and definitely it's as big a problem as alcohol impaired driving in terms of, it's not safe to drive under the influence of certain drugs. Sedative drugs, they slow down how your brain works, so you can't react quickly to certain situations. And driving's interesting because so many of us do it on a daily basis and we don't always think of it as something complicated. But in reality, just driving a vehicle, keeping it in a straight line, reacting to situations on the road, paying attention to your surroundings, it's all things that you need to be fully aware of what's going on. So drugs such as, cannabis or sedative drugs, they can interfere with your ability to operate a motor vehicle, which is why we have strict laws against drugs and driving.
Can you explain anything else about the general drug interactions between something like THC and a sedative?
It's going to mean that you're going to have increased impairing effects because they both work like on the brain in a similar way. They're both going to slow down how your brain functions, how you react to things. So if you have the presence of at least two of these drugs, it's going to increase the adverse effects.
Oh, okay. So regarding this, what are your thoughts on this case? Do you think there's anything particularly challenging here?
There's lots of things that are challenging about this case, and just in general, I mean, it's such a sad case, you know, so many people lost their lives. But in terms of the toxicology evidence, you've got a very high concentration of THC, which is the active ingredient in cannabis. So that's the substance that, you know, gives people the high, and it's also the substance that impairs you. You've also got this new drug that's only recently been kind of discovered being used in Canada. So we don't have a lot of scientific information about that drug. And then in terms of THC, in 2018, there was a new law introduced for a legal limit for driving for THC. And so this is one of the first times that this new law has actually been challenged. So this court case, depending on what the judge rules, it could actually strike down the law saying that above 5 nanograms per mil of THC in your system, it's illegal to drive a motor vehicle. So the challenges of scientists testifying in this case, trying to explain the science to the judge, and the fact that there's so much kind of riding on this result, it makes it really, really challenging.
Thank you for that. And another thing, we would be talking about the Canadian Drugs and Driving Committee. We're on the topic of that. Since the use of drugs in driving has become extremely problematic, what can your role in the Canadian Drugs and Driving Committee affected your work career and how you perceive things like that now?
So yeah, the Drugs and Driving Committee, it's an organization that's designed to offer scientific expertise to the Department of Justice. So that's the Federal Department of Justice in Canada. So they're the ones that are going to set laws about things like drug impaired driving. But to do that, they need the scientific input. So there's a group of us, we're scientists from across Canada that kind of help explain the science to them. It's an interesting organization, and in recent years, it's become busier than usual because it's only been since 2018 that we've had what we call per se limits for drug impaired driving. Per se limits, people have heard about them in relation to alcohol. I think we've all heard it's, you know, like over 80 charge, you can't drive with an alcohol concentration 80 or higher. And then now we're starting to introduce these laws for drugs. But to do that, the government needs to know, okay, so what is the drug? Like, does it impair your driving ability? And if it does, what concentration should we set? And drugs are more complicated than alcohol. Because, for example, if we talk about cannabis is a legal substance now. Some people take it for medical purposes. So how do you set a limit? And are there some circumstances where people should be allowed to drive of cannabis? So it's very complicated, and that's one of the roles of the Drugs and Driving Committee, is to assess the science and advise the government.
How did you originally start working with them?
So a few years ago, they had a lot of work because they were doing a lot of research, trying to kind of advise the government. So they knew that I was interested in drug impaired driving. I'd done some research, and also I'd got a lot of experience testifying in court. So at first they asked me if I would do some background research for them, which I did. And then they asked me to join the organization full time, which I was happy to do. Because what they want people with a background in science, in forensic toxicology, but also if they have people that are used to testifying in court, you know some of the issues that are likely to arise. And that's the difference between being kind of, say, a research scientist and being a forensic scientist, It's knowing the kind of the forensic applications. You can know the science, but you also want to know, okay, what issues are going to arise in court, what kind of challenges are going to arise.
That's really important. Having more toxicologists and like knowledgeable people in organizations like that is very important, and more awareness should be brought to matters like that. And as a forensic toxicologist, can you walk us through your role in a case from start to finish?
Yeah, it's going to depend on the type of case. So some toxicologists are going to be involved and they'll do kind of lab work, they'll do the analysis and provide the results. My role tends to be more like interpretation of the results. So if I consult on a case, it might depend on the specific case, but sometimes I'm provided like results from a lab and I'll go through, make sure everything's been done correctly. And then depending what the findings are, my role is going to be talking about kind of what is the drug, what would be possible effects of the drug, and then provide a summary of my findings. Sometimes it could be a case where there are no findings and they just want a general opinion about the effects of drugs. An example could be a sexual assault case where somebody believes that they were drugged, but it happened a long time ago and there is no physical evidence, but there might be like history of the case. So they might report certain symptoms, how they felt when they believed they were, they had been drugged. So as a toxicologist, I can provide general information kind of about what drugs could cause these effects, what type of drugs. So it really does depend on the particular case. It also involves a lot of research. Sometimes it can be, maybe a new drug, like the one we were talking about earlier, the novel kind of benzodiazepine. If it's something brand new, then my role is going to be do some research, find out what I can about the drug. So it's definitely case dependent, but it's always interesting and you always seem to learn something new, like every case that you work on.
So in regards to your role as a forensic toxicologist, what were some of your favorite aspects? So I'm guessing it would probably be learning new things along the way.
Yeah, I think learning new things is great. Being involved in an investigation, sometimes there's a lot of collaboration. The toxicologist is normally kind of definitely part of a team. So, sometimes you work with police officers, you work with lawyers, you might work with coroners and pathologists, and it's great providing, sometimes I refer to it as you provide a piece of the puzzle and then the whole team will put the puzzle together. And it's great having a role in something like that.
What do you like about testifying in court during cases that require your expert opinion evidence?
It's interesting because testifying in court can be challenging and it can be scary, but one of the things I personally like about it is I like to put things in simple terms. I always like summarizing things, and so if you're testifying in court, it can be helpful if you want to put things across simply so people that don't necessarily have the scientific background can understand. And it might sound easy to do that, but sometimes it can be challenging to have a complicated scientific concept that you're explaining, but I actually enjoy trying to put it in simple terms. So if I'm talking to a jury and I can see some of the jury members that are kind of nodding along as if they understand it, then I can find that quite rewarding.
I feel like doing that, especially on like a platform like Zoom, when a lot of trials had to go like to online, must have been a bit difficult because it's harder to gauge their reactions to things.
It's interesting actually, because sometimes when I've been testifying by Zoom, I might only see one person in the courtroom. So sometimes the camera's on the judge and I can see the judge, but the person questioning me, I can't see them, I can just hear them. And you're right, it's a little bit strange because you know how you read kind of people's facial expressions sometimes. So it's like, are they getting angry at me? I can't tell. So yeah, the testifying on Zoom is definitely challenging.
becoming a toxicologist takes many years of study, and a lot of people are unsure of what that may entail. Can you give us a brief history of your schooling? So from undergrad to master's and everything in between.
Yeah, I'll give kind of my background, but it might be slightly different because I did my schooling in England, so slightly different system to in Canada. So just kind of remember that. I did my bachelor's degree in biomedical sciences. My final year was specializing in pharmacology and toxicology. And that's when I got interested in drugs. Pharmacology is the study of how drugs work. So then I decided that I wanted to do a PhD. And in England, the way you normally do it is you enroll for a master's degree, but then after the first year, if you've made sufficient progress, then you can convert to a PhD. So I transferred into the PhD program after my first year. So I didn't get a master's degree. I ended up going straight to a PhD. So I did that. So my PhD was in the pharmacology of anxiety disorders, like the drugs to treat them. And then I wanted to do postdoc research, and that's when I moved to Canada. And I switched, same kind of area, but I switched into alcohol addiction, and I did some research in the pharmacology of alcohol addiction at CAMH in Toronto. And it was while I was doing that I saw the job advertised at the Centre of Forensic Sciences, applied for that, and that's how I kind of got into forensic toxicology.
I think that's really neat that you could start a master's degree, but then if you're doing well in it, you can kind of transition, because I know like some master's programs are only like a year, less than a year, but that's just it. And it's nice how they let you kind of continue it, if, you know, if you're doing really well and you like it. So I definitely wish we had that system here.
It was definitely a good system. And then sometimes here, when people find out, it's like I didn't do the master's and I converted to the PhD, it's almost like, oh, how did you manage to do that? But it wasn't an unusual thing. It was just the different system. So that's why I kind of want people in Canada to know that that's not the typical route. It is more typical in England.
Was your PhD 4 years, or was it 5 because of the 1 year for your master's?
Okay, so don't hate me for saying this, but my PhD is actually 3 years. So even with the conversion, the program that I did, they like to get students through in 3 years. So it was a very, very intense 3 years, not many days off in that entire time. But, you know, I was young at the time. I was kind of happy to do it. So, yeah, it was an intense 3 years, but I actually got it done in 3 years.
So when you had saw the job posting for CFS, that's when your liking for forensic science kind of kicked in, right?
Okay, so the background to that is when I was younger, I was interested in forensic science. I actually went to a talk that a forensic scientist gave when I was about 14, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. I would love to do this. But back then, there were no undergraduate degrees in forensic science. So I kind of went to university and I almost forgot about the forensic science because you couldn't study it. Liked pharmacology, so I thought I'm going to continue that route. And then it was the job that was advertised, and I kind of thought, oh my God, I always wanted to do that. Maybe I could have applied and I'll see what happens. And I kind of got lucky, and so I did a slight career change, but the background in pharmacology was really helpful.
How do you feel about forensic science undergraduate programs now being offered in like different areas of the world, and especially here at UTM?
I think it's great. I definitely would have wanted to take one if you know they'd been available when I went to university. I think they're really interesting. They give you a great scientific kind of grounding, like a really good education. So if you want to go into forensic science, obviously it's great, but even some people that want to go into different careers. So I've had students that want to be like pharmacists, they want to be optometrists, they want to be kind of doctors, lawyers. But if you do a degree that you're really interested in, I think it's easier to do well because a lot of the classes, subjects you take, it's a lot easier when you really like the subject. So I think it gives you a great education, but it's also hopefully enjoyable for the students too.
I definitely would say so. It has been very enjoyable. So, how do you maintain a work-life balance in addition to all of these other responsibilities that you have?
It's funny for this question. It's almost like I can give you the answer that makes it sound like it's easy to do, but the truthful answer is some weeks I feel like I don't have a good work-life balance. Some weeks it's definitely better. In general, though, I do find like I do like to get a good night's sleep. I'm not very good at like working late. I know. I was just talking to a couple of students about 20 minutes ago, and they were telling me they can't remember the last time they got more than 4 hours sleep, which like is pretty hard, but I do understand it. For me, no matter how busy I am, I like to get a good night's sleep. If I have time, I'm a big fan of just like watching stuff on Netflix and kind of relaxing at the end of the day. So for me, it's relaxing on Netflix and getting a good night's sleep. But some weeks I do find it difficult. Sometimes you can get extra busy, and yeah, it can be hard to do.
I think getting sleep is very underrated because, especially even as a student, it's really helpful because like sleep affects your memory in a lot of ways. So it's important to get sleep if you want to do well on tests and things like that.
Sometimes I'll get an email from a student at say 3:30 in the morning, and I'll have class at 9 o'clock, and they'll be in the class at 9 o'clock. And I feel like saying to them, you did not get enough sleep last night. But
I think it's almost like some people like to compare their sleep patterns with you, and I'm like, well, I only slept for 4.5 and like I still feel fine. And I'm like, okay, but like I can't function with 4.5. Like I like getting 8.5 or 9 hours. Like it's not a competition.
You know, I feel the exact same way, and I think it's society in a way. People like to brag about how hard they're working and how they can function on so little sleep. It's like, don't brag about it. It's nothing to brag about. We should be bragging, oh, I got 8 hours sleep last night. Isn't that great? That's what we should be bragging about.
Yeah, definitely agree. So another question, what is another common misconception about forensic toxicology when being compared to other forensic disciplines or anything that's kind of in the media or in television?
In terms of, I know a lot of people think forensic toxicology is the same as forensic chemistry, and it's not. So there's some aspects of chemistry in forensic toxicology, but a big part of forensic toxicology it's about the effects of drugs and poisons on the body. So you get a lot of people who don't have like a real background in chemistry. They have more of a biology background, and they can make excellent forensic toxicologists. So sometimes I talk to students and they're interested, but they feel that they can't go into that career because they haven't done enough chemistry courses. There's different types of forensic toxicologists, but one of the things that I'm always saying to people is, look, I'm not a chemist, I'm a toxicologist. Like my background is more biology than chemistry. So I would say that's one of the biggest misconceptions.
I feel like that makes a lot of sense too, because a lot of people are afraid of chemistry because they feel like it's very difficult for them, which everyone has their own like personal abilities and stuff. So a lot of people feel like toxicology is just chemistry and they can't do it. But it's good to hear that like it's also more biology based and there's like an overlap between them.
I've worked with people that have a chemistry background. I've worked with people that have a biology background. I've worked with people that have their undergraduate degrees in environmental science and have chosen to go into forensic tox. So yeah, it's definitely quite a wide range of people that can end up having a career in forensic toxicology.
Related to this, I know a lot of students like myself are looking into pursuing a career in forensic toxicology. So do you have any advice for students who want to go into forensic tox specifically?
Definitely take some of the toxicology related courses that we have at UTM. And really, kind of don't worry if you don't think that you've got the ideal background. Like I just mentioned, you don't have to be kind of the best chemist. You don't have to be the best biologist. It's having that interest. I always think if you're really interested in a subject, you've got a greater chance of succeeding. So yeah, I would say don't think that there's only one route that you can take, but definitely take the forensic courses and take the ones that are specifically related to toxicology.
For students who are looking into going to like a master's program or a PhD, would you recommend them going into like pharmacology or toxicology?
I think it's one of the options. I think it would be a very good option. But there's other options that they can do too. But and I've had this question quite a lot. If a student says, I want to be a forensic toxicologist and I'm thinking about doing a master's degree in pharmacology or toxicology, I definitely tell them like that's definitely a good route. Yeah.
Would you be able to tell us a memorable story about being a forensic toxicologist?
I think I'll tell a story from a few years ago. I was asked to go and testify at a Senate hearing in Canada. That's something unusual. I'd never been asked to do that before. But the reason I was asked was they were trying to introduce new legislation about fentanyl trafficking. Fentanyl is one of the powerful opioids that's been a real kind of driving force behind the opioid crisis. So it's been a serious public health issue in Canada. So, but one of the things that sticks in my mind when I went to testify at this hearing, there was 3 of us on a panel. There was a police officer that worked on drug trafficking cases. I was there to talk about the toxicity of fentanyl, but the third person was a woman who had lost her son due to a fentanyl overdose, and she was there to give her personal kind of story about it. And one of the incredibly sad things about her story was that it was her eldest son that gave her youngest son the fentanyl that ended up killing him. And hearing her story, like the first-hand kind of how drug use can affect somebody and a family, and the fact that she was brave enough to come and talk about this in front of a Senate hearing, it was really kind of moving, and I felt like she did a lot of good. You could see the emotion on the senator's face when they were hearing the impacts of, you know, what this drug does to a family, and that was a very memorable experience for me.
Have you been?
Oh, sorry.
Have you consulted on any cases recently?
Yes, I'm working on quite a few cases right now. I moved to UTM full time a few years ago, but I still do consultancy work, and I like consulting on cases because I feel like it definitely keeps me up to date. And then sometimes if I testify, there's usually some kind of story or like anecdote that I can bring back and kind of tell the students that I teach. And I think it's something that teaching at the university, I kind of want to like let the students know what it's really like to kind of still work on forensic cases. So yeah, right now I'm consulting on quite a few cases.
I think it's really interesting being able to both like teach and also like work in the field, so that you're like you said, you're able to keep up to date with everything. And also like I feel like it's a very interesting balance being able to do both at the same time.
Yeah, it can be hard work sometimes, but it's definitely interesting. And I think for me, I think it's useful for my teaching, the fact that I do consulting. And but then the other way around is the teaching also keeps me up to date. So some of the things I'll be teaching in a class, when if I'm testifying, I'm asked a question, and sometimes I think, I just talked about this last week in class. So like it works both ways.
I think it's really good to, especially in a field like forensic science where things are constantly evolving and changing, I think it's really good that you get to have best of both worlds in that aspect and in general too as well.
Yeah.
Cassie, did you have any other questions for us?
No, I don't.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Woodall, for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you. It's amazing because we have so many different professors in the discipline of forensic science at UTM. So if anyone else is interested in our other podcasts, feel free to check them out in our YouTube. And if you have any requests for professors, you can email us or DM us on Instagram. So yeah, thank you for joining, and we hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thanks a lot for having me on your podcast. Bye.